Okay, welcome to Levels Baptist Church Sunday night Bible study. We are in the book of Esther, and we have made it up to chapter 6. And last time we started looking, what was it? Verses 1 to 6. So now we want to pick up. 6 sort of got split up a little bit here. We left off thinking about this early morning scene where Haman has gone to the king's court thinking about Mordecai and how much he would love to quickly have Mordecai arrested, taken to the gallows, and hanged. And interestingly enough, the king had spent the previous night not getting much sleep, also thinking about Mordecai, but very much in a different way, in the sense that, if you remember, the king couldn't sleep. He had somebody read some chronicles to him, and he was reminded of a time when Mordecai had saved his life, giving him some information. And so the king realized, I owe this guy. And so I've got to do something to honor him, to pay this debt. So there's Haman in the court, and they're both thinking about Mordecai. The king sends some servant to go look in the wherever, in the hallway or whatever. Go find somebody. We need to get this ball rolling. Haman happens to be the one standing there. So verse 6, this is chapter 6, Esther 6:6. So Haman came in, the king said unto him, What shall be done unto the man whom the king delighteth to honor? Now Haman thought in his heart, To whom would the king delight to do honor more than to myself? So we talked about how this would have gone very differently if the conversation had started differently, but it goes the way it's supposed to go, and the king sends the servant, go get who is ever out there first available. It happens to be Haman. Haman comes in, and the king right away begins a conversation by saying, Hey, what would we do to honor someone that I want to honor? Well, Haman's pretty full of himself, pretty confident, and he's had a lot of things going right, going his way. So he's pretty well built up, kind of up on a peak maybe. And so he's obviously thinking of himself, oh, the king must be wanting to honor me. And the king didn't give a name. He didn't give a lot of specifics or details, who he wanted to honor, why he wanted to honor them, what it was that they had done. So Haman is kind of in the dark. So anyway, Haman comes in, they have a conversation. The king says, How is it that we would delight someone? And again, things had been going well for Haman. He had drawn up this ruling or decree to have the Jews removed. He had been invited to Esther's banquet. The only one invited outside or other than the king. One the day before, one again later that same day. So he's thinking a lot of himself, and he's thinking, okay, boy, I must just really be a good guy. Things are going my way. The king's recognizing my skill, my leadership abilities. It's not being recognized only by the king, but even by the queen as well. And so his thinking of himself, it's interesting how all this works together. When the king asks him, what might we do to honor someone? Well, here's his opportunity to spill out to the king his wish list of how he personally would love to be treated or honored. Well, we know, because we know the story, that his king's not talking about honoring Haman. Anyway, moving on, verse 7. And Haman answered the king, For the man whom the king delighteth to honor. Haman is most definitely thinking of himself. And we wouldn't need these words if he wasn't thinking of himself. But he is most certainly thinking, assuming the king must be wanting to honor me. So it's almost as if he's repeating the king's word and he's adding to it because he's so built up and he's so proud in this moment. The king has to be talking about me, and I want to make sure that I get the very top honor. Well, the phrase there says, the man whom the king delights to honor. You actually have an extra word, for here, F-O-R, and it's inserted. You're supposed to be getting some extra clarity from that word, that addition there, but it's really not necessary. The broken nature of the sentence shows the excitement in Haman's response. The king asked him, what is it we should do to honor someone that the king has a delight in? The man whom the king delights to honor. Well, here it is, king. Let me just spell it out for you. Let me give you my wish list. Verse number 8. Let the royal apparel be brought, which the king useth to wear, and the horse that the king rideth upon, and the crown royal which is set upon his head. It's noted that wearing a kingly robe, and so in other words, just our understanding of how things were done in that day and that time, this would not have been acceptable for anyone other than the king to wear the kingly apparel. But if it was being done because of the king commanding that it be done, then it might be okay. It might be accepted. So this is an extremely special circumstance, but it's okay to use this extremely special apparel, the king's robe, a very special robe, not necessarily the regular garments that he would just wear on an average day, but something that would provide the highest form of recognition, something that shows the king's absolute favor of this individual. And it would have to be that level of appreciation for the king to agree to allow one of his own special robes to be placed upon someone other than himself. This is a little bit similar to in Genesis 41 when Pharaoh calls for his greatest attire to be placed upon Joseph. And even in 1 Samuel 18, Jonathan's garments are given to David. This is also maybe a foreshadowing of in the time of Christ when there is kingly attire, which sadly it's in two different situations. There's a scenario where he rides in on Good Friday on the donkey where he's actually being praised truthfully, but then there's also the time where the Roman guards are mocking him and they put some fake royal attire on him. Verse 8 goes on, and a horse on which the king is ridden. The idea is to thoroughly elevate this person, whoever it is. Bring the king's attire, his clothes. Bring the king's horse, this royal horse. And there's great symbolism here. The symbolism would not be missed by anyone who would see this person wearing this robe, riding this horse. In Genesis 41, Joseph was made to ride in Pharaoh's second chariot. When Solomon was to be ordained as king in David's place, David directed that he be taken on his own mule to Gahan for the ceremony. This honor would be made all the more distinct by another symbol of kingly authority. So this is interesting here to study the rest of this verse, which has a royal crest placed on its head. The last part of verse 8, and the crown royal which is set upon his head. So there's different ways to look at this and what is being said here. The idea or the average thinking is that we're talking about a crown, a king's crown, a royal crown that the king would have worn on his head. But is it really mean that? Or is it talking about a crown on the horse's head? The Hebrew is specific. It is talking about the horse. when you look back at ancient Assyria, there are monuments. We can see this now in our world today. You can go and study the day, the time, this era that this was taking place. A king's horse had his own crown, a very special crown, something with an insignia, a crest of something, but everyone would know. They would recognize that horse. Now, I'm pretty sure horses were everywhere. They had plenty of horses. Solomon had stables. There were probably a ton of horses available. How would you recognize one horse from another? Just another horse. But not if he's wearing a crown. A very specific, a very special crown with a particular crest. Something that would identify that is the king's horse. And obviously, whoever is riding it, they must be either the king or someone that the king very much would like to honor. All right, verse 9. And let this apparel and horse be delivered to the hand of one of the king's most noble princes, that they may array the man withal whom the king delighteth to honor, and bring him on horseback through the street of the city, and proclaim before him, thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delighteth to honor. Not only does Haman suggest that the royal robe, the royal apparel, the royal horse, all these things be furnished, but it's very interesting here that he specifically wants these things to be handled by one of the king's highest princes. This is the same word. We looked at this before way back in chapter 1 verse 3, translated the nobles, but it's a Persian word that's brought into Hebrew that actually means first. In other words, Haman, in his mind, the king says, we're going to honor somebody. What is the very best thing we could possibly do to honor this person? It's not just enough to get the king's apparel, not just enough to get the king's horse. We have to make sure that the person in charge of this, the person that's going to deliver these things, is one of the king's highest ranking officers. Not just some peasant, not just some servant. How ironic that the noble prince, this first person selected from this higher elevated position, would wind up being Haman himself. Here he was thinking, I would want the highest elevated prince to lower themselves to make the honored person look that much more important or that much higher in elevation. And the whole time, well, eventually he finds out it's him that winds up being the one lowered to take on this task. So you would provide the items, you would take the apparel, you would take the horse, you would take them to the person to be honored, and you would lay those clothing items on this person to be honored. You would be the actual person going through these steps to elevate this person, to honor this person. How very ironic. We're going to use this apparel to array the man in whom the king delights to honor. The verb is actually third person, and you would read it this way, that they may array the man. It's speaking of all the people involved in getting the things to him and ensuring he is attired in them. So just think of a scenario where maybe like a fashion party, but there's one special person in the middle of the room. I mean, I'm almost kind of picturing a bride and her bridesmaids are all around her, and they're trying to do everything they can possibly do to give her all the attention that she wants and desires, and they're helping to fix her hair and her makeup and putting on her clothing or wedding gown and all those things. This is the scenario of what he's thinking he wants to see happen. Again, talking about Haman. He wants to be this higher elevated person in the middle of the room with all of these attendants coming around serving him the same way they would serve the king. He would be the center of attention as others came to him to serve him. So there'd be a parade. This honored person would be on horseback. They would go through the city square, and there would be a proclamation. Here is the man in whom the king delights to honor. So here we have this individual. They're going to be arrayed. They're going to have the royal attire. They're going to be on the royal horse. But what good is that if all they do is just ride around in the temple square, not temple, but the king's square right outside of his door, basically, his castle or whatever it was? Well, that'd be silly. I mean, just so the king could see him? No. It really doesn't mean anything and doesn't get recognized. I mean, this is all about the king wanting to be recognized. He wants everyone to be able to say, oh, the king is paying off his debt. This person saved his life. This is paying off his debt. Well, if people don't see it, then what good is it? So there has to be this time where this person is led out all over the town so that everyone would see this person that the king is honoring. It had to be public. So Haman's greatest dreams, he thought, were about to come true. He'd be elevated even further, even higher than he'd ever been elevated before. He'd now be a hero to the common people. And they would be more willing to bow now than ever before. They would be more willing than ever before to give him the praise and the honor that he so desired. And this is, again, I draw a parallel to Genesis 41. Matter of fact, let's read Genesis 41:43. Let's just see how close we are. Genesis 41:43. And he made him to ride in the second chariot which he had, and they cried before him, bow the knee. And he made him ruler over all the land of Egypt. So this is Haman now putting himself in the shoes of Joseph, assuming what is going to be happening to him. Moving on to verse 10. This is Esther chapter 6, verse 10. Then the king said to Haman, make haste, take the apparel and the horse, as thou hast said. Now, if you stop right there, Haman's in a really good mood, and everything's going his way, and he thinks that he's about to be honored until the king finishes this sentence. Then the king said to Haman, make haste and take the apparel and the horse as thou hast said, and do even so to Mordecai, Haman's mortal enemy. Remember, this is the Mordecai that Haman was there thinking about because he wanted to have him arrested and killed. So the rest of the verse, even do so to Mordecai, the Jew, that sitteth at the king's gate. Let nothing fail of all that thou hast spoken. The urgency of the command shows that the king felt as if a royal pardon for delaying such an honor would next be necessary. He had overlooked the saving of his own life by another, and he wanted that oversight to be fixed immediately. The advice given was appropriate to the situation. There was a noble. He was already available. He was already there physically in attendance, and he could carry out these instructions. Everything was available. Haman was this elevated person. He was there, he was available, and he could implement the very plan that he had devised. He could carry it out. The apparel was there, it was ready, available. The horse was there, ready and available. In a short span of time, the debt to the throne would be repaid with honor to the subject who deserved his wages for his attentive care. The words here tend to confirm that the crown of the crest, and this is reflecting once again back to the crown that's mentioned. Again, there's debate. Are we talking about the king's crown, which I don't see the king letting anybody else wear his crown. That's why I favor the idea of it being a horse's crown, to identify the horse. Otherwise, he's not a special horse, it's just a horse. But here now, in these words, we have confirmation in the wording in the original language. they confirmed that the crown, the crest, whatever the identification was, it was definitely for the horse, not the rider. So again, this is about identifying the horse. If it was the other way around, then you would include here now, it would say, what are you going to do for the rider? You're going to supply the apparel, the clothes, the robe, and the crown. And it does not say that. So again, I lean towards it being an identifying marker for the horse. So the king says, okay, do everything that you said you were going to do, including the ornament for the horse, to identify the horse, and do it to Mordecai. Who? The Mordecai, the Jew. You know, the Jew that sits in the king's gate. So we have all these markers here. His name, his national relationship, his Israeli, this Jew, and then what else? He sits in the king's gate. So there is no question. Maybe there were 10 Mordecais, maybe there were 100 Mordecais, but there was only one Mordecai who was a Jew who sat in the king's gate. And of course, obviously, Haman knew very quickly, I'm sure, who it was. Now, there could have been a little bit of moment of fuzzy, like, oh, you got to be kidding me. There's no way that this is who he's talking about. Well, the king made sure that it was clear. This is who I'm talking about. This is the one that I want to honor. I'm giving you his name. I'm telling you what country or nationality that he recognizes, and even the sitting in the king's gate had something to do with his position or his job. All of these things would have been fresh on the king's mind because they would have been part of the recording of what had just been read to the king. So the name would have been on the tip of his tongue. The fact that he was a Jew, the fact he sat in the king's gate. So it wasn't necessarily pointing to the fact that the king, like they were buddies or he talked to him every day or whatever. It's not saying that at all. These were the specifics, the details that had just been read back to him from the Chronicles. So some call into question the historical truth of the account. Because of these words, they ask, how is it possible that the king would have forgotten that he had committed all of the Jews to death? So many people look at this and they say, oh, wait a minute. The king just signed a decree, didn't he? Giving Haman permission to get rid of all the Jews. Well, actually, if you check back to Haman's words in chapter 3, he never says Jew. All he said to the king was, there is a certain people scattered, dispersed among the people in all the provinces of your kingdom. They didn't have to be from Israel. They could have been from anywhere. With a little more talk about them, he offered to have them eliminated and to place the money in the king's treasury to do so. The subject of who these people were, the fact that they were Jews from Israel, was never mentioned. The king was simply going along with what Haman had brought to him as a good idea to get rid of this particular group of people. What were they? What people group were they? Were they robbers, thieves, bad guys? It was never given as a specific detail to the king when he wrote the decree that it was making reference to a people group from a particular land, a nationality, Israelites or Jews. It was Haman who harbored the ill will, the recompense for his wickedness towards the Jews, and now it rolls back upon him. The king is very thorough. He gives him the name of who it is he's supposed to recognize, the fact that he's a Jew. He sits in the king's gate. And he likes Haman's plan so much, he says, make sure you do everything that you have said that you want done so that this person knows they've been honored and so everyone else knows that I honor them. The great honors which Haman had longed to be heaped upon him, they would now go to Mordecai. The hatred between the Amalekites and the Jews was ancient, with only moments. His first battle in the war, which would lead to victory over them, was about to happen. But instead, he is within moments of being humiliated, facing his worst defeat ever. Verse 11. Then took Haman the apparel and the horse, and arrayed Mordecai, and brought him on horseback through the street of the city, and proclaimed before him, Thus shall it be done unto the man whom the king delighteth to honor. Haman had arrogantly assumed he was the one that the king desired to honor. It's, again, the irony here that one of the steps to Haman's plan was to include a noble, a prince, someone of higher elevation, to have to lower themselves to be servant to the person being honored. Now he finds out he just put himself in those shoes. He himself is going to be the one to have to carry this out to honor Mordecai. There was no way he could get out of it now at this point. There was no way he could run from it, or he was the highest first prince, the one that was there, that was available, and it was his idea. No one else could possibly fit the bill better than he. So the decision was made, the duty was carried out, and we're not giving any information. Now, I can only assume what he was thinking, what he was feeling. It'd be very easy to say, I'm sure he was disgusted, I'm sure he's upset by it. The Bible doesn't give us those words as far as what type of complaint that he may have voiced, any kind of opinion or comment. We don't have that. We don't know what he may have said. But very easy to put yourself in those shoes and just see the roller coaster ride of him being way, way, way up high, and everything's going his way, and then now all of a sudden, boy, what a crash. When the king said that name, Mordecai, okay, that's perfect. I love your plan. You go and do all those things for Mordecai. Boy, what a crash. I could just feel the intensity of that moment in his mind. Just, wow. So, for Mordecai, this is an interesting thing to think about. There's an edict. The Jews are about to be exterminated. And here comes his mortal enemy, Haman, to wrap him in the king's apparel, put him on the king's horse, walk him around town, and honor him. Is it possible? Now I'm asking you to use your imagination to put yourself in his shoes, but I wonder if Mordecai, we just talked about how we could put ourselves in Haman's shoes and imagine what he might be thinking. What about Mordecai? Maybe for the first time ever he's thinking, oh, wait a minute. This could be a step in the right direction. This could possibly help us get out of this situation that we're in. Well, several times, I think 5, 6, 7 times up to now, we've mentioned to you that there's these kind of like a twin verse or a set of twos where two verses are very, very similar in many ways, but there might be one little thing that differentiates or makes it separate or different. Here, Mordecai is invested. He's got these special clothes, this apparel, the king's royal apparel, the actual honor itself, the riding of the king's horse, all of this payment for his good deed that he had done towards the king. Well, looking ahead in chapter 8, verse 15, we'll see a very similar situation where he will have royal apparel, blue and white, great crown of gold, garment of fine linen, and purple. So there is a contrast, because here in this one, it's a temporary honor. We don't know how long it lasted. It could have lasted for an hour, 2 or 3 hours. But how long would you ride a horse around town and have somebody lead you around and honor you? It wouldn't last very long in the grand scheme of things. So it was a temporary honoring, wearing the king's apparel, riding the king's horse. But the next time in chapter 8, verse 15, it is a permanent appointment in the king's palace. Now they contrast, but yet they confirm the honorable deeds of Mordecai. It confirms for you and I the kind of person that he is, and now that it's being recognized. Verse 12, and Mordecai came again to the king's gate, but Haman hasted to his house, mourning and having his head covered. So back to the idea, this didn't last too very long. Verse 11, he gets dressed, gets on the horse, rides around town. Verse 12, he's right back in the king's gate. How long did it last? Probably not too very long. Since chapter 2, it's been stated numerous times that Mordecai had a position where he sat in the king's gate. And I mentioned earlier, this is something to do with his job. Well, this points to the idea of a couple of things, that he was either a eunuch or had some other kind of job working for the king. The gate is where he was collected or picked up, or where Haman met him and said, hey, come on, let's go. I got something to do with you. And then it's the same place where he drops him back off. Again, he's there in the gate. He leaves for a little while, comes right back. So I mentioned this 2 weeks ago because we didn't have this Bible study last Sunday night. Can you imagine the roller coaster ride and what's going on in Mordecai's head? I'm in the king's gate, I'm kind of a nobody, and all of a sudden I'm riding, wearing the king's apparel and the king's horse. I'm riding all over town being honored. But then it's quickly over and he's right back in the king's gate, right back doing the same job, whatever it was. The royal apparel's gone, the royal horse is gone, Haman's gone. Man, was it enough to kind of give him some pride and get him puffed up? Maybe, I don't know. But it seems as though he just kind of quietly went right back to work, back to his routine life, and just almost as if it didn't change him at all. So kind of nice to see that. But what do we see with Haman? He's done. He's fulfilled the task. He's taken Mordecai out, taken him back, dumped him in the king's gate, and he's off. He's hurrying home. He's in mourning, and he covers his head, it says there specifically. Well, I feel good about believing that Mordecai was happy to receive the honor, but was also willing to go back to where he was prior, fitting right back into what he had been doing before. But Haman, he's got to be in bad shape, right? He's got to be in a really bad place mentally. There's an urgency. It specifically says he was in a hurry to get back home, as if he wanted to shut out the world and just put it all behind him and just forget about it. It says that he was mourning, which is a sign of deep distress, that he covered his head. This is a sign of exceeding shame. When Absalom overthrew David, it says in 2 Samuel 15:30 that as David fled, ascended to the Mount of Olives, he was weeping and he covered his head. Psalm 44 verse 15 says, my dishonor, or King James says, my confusion is continually before me, and the shame of my face has covered me. Jeremiah also speaks of the shame of drought, a sign of the Lord's displeasure. And Jeremiah 14:4 says, because the ground is parched, for there was no rain in the land, the plowmen were ashamed, they covered their heads. So it's a very well-known concept or idea or fact, many oftentimes throughout the Bible. This mourning, very bad place mentally, and then shame was represented by covering of the head. Well, once again, we have here another twin verse or set of twos. Haman's face is covered by himself at the beginning of his downfall. Here in this moment, he's running away in shame. He's desperate for comfort. He wants to go home to where he's safe, to his wife. Maybe some buddies will be there. In chapter 7, verse 8, his face is covered again. This time, it's as he's being led to the gallows. So his house is mentioned there, but it's in reverse. He's leaving his home with his head covered, heading to the gallows. So there's a contrast in detail, but it's interesting how they both. So we've been talking about Mordecai and the kind of person, the kind of character he had, to go from the gate as probably some kind of a lowly servant type position, rides around on the king's horse. I mean, let's just be honest. Your head would be swole, right? You'd be really proud to ride around the king's apparel on the king's horse and go all over town and be honored. But it seems as if it didn't change him or affect him. He goes right back to the king's gate, right back to work, doing whatever his normal duties were. It really speaks to his character. But here, these verses describing Haman, they do the same thing. They give us a picture of his character, the kind of man this wicked Haman was. Verse 13. And Haman told Zeresh his wife and all his friends everything that had befallen him. Then said his wise men and Zeresh his wife unto him, If Mordecai be of the seed of the Jews, before whom thou hast begun to fall, thou shalt not prevail against him, but shalt surely fall before him. Very interesting. Haman was emotional and not secretly emotional. It showed. He was just the day before running home to brag, to talk about what a great life he had. Now the opposite, running home to share with his wife and his friends how terrible things were. If there was Facebook, he would have included all the sad details of his life, even though it was this huge turnaround in 24 hours from being way up high and elevated to everything going great to the very next day on the bottom of the barrel. So he tells his friends all about everything that had happened, and he's hoping that they'll say, oh man, blow it off, don't worry about it, everything's going to be all right. But that's not what they say. Here we see the same wording as we saw back in chapter 5, verse 11. Hebrew wording translated as told, a recounting. Before he recounted all of the great things which had occurred to him, now he's recounting all of the miserable things which have come about. Again, 24 hours. What a huge difference. He's hoping for comfort, but yet instead he gets this response. If Mordecai, before whom you have begun to fall, is of Jewish descent, you will not prevail against him. Well, there's a lot of debate about this verse. Scholars have pondered these words. They're hard to explain. Well, are they really that hard to understand? Some commentaries go into detail about the idea of the people being Jews meant that they were under divine hand of protection. Well, that's funny because God hasn't been mentioned one single time. So if that was the understanding, surely it would have been mentioned. That would have been talked about. But that's one of the things that sets Esther apart from all the other books of the Bible. God's not mentioned. So, and that makes it sound like they didn't know Mordecai was a Jew. They knew he was a Jew. That comes up back in chapter 5, verse 13. What has become obvious to them has nothing to do with the relationship between Jew and, oh, that means there's special protection. That's not what this is about. What they're doing is they're connecting the dots. 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, Esther's a Jew, and the king likes her a lot. He's doing the things she wants him to do. Mordecai's a Jew. The king likes him a lot. So all they're doing is just looking at the dominoes and watching them fall and making the assumption that, well, if those two people are in those positions and they had good things come about, so really they're not thinking about God at all. They're more along the lines of thinking about karma or some kind of a momentum kind of thing where, well, this group of people, if one is doing well, then a second one's doing well, then inertia is going to just continue that momentum going on in that direction. And so I'm quite sure that did not help Mordecai feel better about the situation at all. You and I know, because we have the Bible, we have the full story, that God was at work. It's evident to us from the very first pages, from the very first words, the first verse of the story. These guys are called wise men. It's kind of funny that they're called wise men. Again, they're just looking at what is happening and just turning that into something that's long-term, something that's going to continue and go on. And they don't even really know that. But they're not giving God the credit for it, not in the least. So there's bad news. You're probably going to lose when you're going up against this group of people, because the queen's a Jew, Mordecai's a Jew, the king likes both of them, he's honoring them, doing what they want to do. In the original language, it would say this: for falling you will fall before him. The idea of these words is that because of your fall, your total fall is assured. So you've already been slipping, you've already begun to stumble a little bit, and there's no way to reverse it. You're just going to keep on going down, 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 down. That's their thinking, their rationale. Has nothing to do with the connection between Jews and there being a God that's protecting them. Or look, in their minds, these wise men, they're friends of Haman. Well, here we have again another set of twos, these twin verses. Back in chapter 5, verse 10, we had this very similar scenario. I mentioned it a while ago. He had all this good news. He couldn't wait to rush home to talk to his friends, his wife, tell them all about it. Here we are doing the same thing again, except in the reverse as far as the news is concerned. It was good news before, now it's bad news. But either way, in chapter 5, he went home to brag and seek counsel. His friends gave him counsel. They were the ones that helped him to come up with a plan to destroy Mordecai. Now he's there in mourning and shame, and it's the reverse. This time it's going to wind up being Mordecai that destroys him. So there's a contrast, but they both confirm the enmity between these two men. Haman allows us to see the truth of the proverb 26:27, whoever digs a pit will fall into it, and he who rolls a stone will have it rolled back on him. Haman, metaphorically, had dug a pit for Mordecai, but sadly Haman himself would be the one that would fall in. Haman had attempted to roll the stone of Israel away, and they're going to wind up rolling back on him. This is taking a little bit longer than I meant for it to. I'm going to hit verse 14 just for a couple minutes, and we'll wrap this up and be done with chapter 6. And while they were, Esther, chapter 6, verse 14, while they were yet talking with him, came the king's chamberlains and hasted to bring Haman unto the banquet that Esther had prepared. Well, this is the kicking the weak when they're down, right? This is the worst case scenario. This rapid succession of events that's happened very quickly, culminating here at this verse where he just ran home in shame, he just ran home in mourning, and again, contrasted with the previous day, he was the only one invited to the queen's banquet with the king, bragging about that yesterday. Now he's home in shame and sorrow and grief and mourning to cry and whine to his friends. And what do you know? Here comes a royal court. They've come to gather him up to carry him off to the second banquet. Again, the previous day was all about bragging, all about joy. And now you can just imagine his taste buds on his tongue have gone stale, and there's no possible way for him to enjoy this banquet with the king, with Esther. But nonetheless, here comes the group to pick him up, to take him off to Esther's banquet. Okay, well, this has been long enough. Nonetheless, I do want to say, just to remind you, over and over again, we have seen the hand of God moving. We haven't seen the name mentioned. We haven't seen anyone give God any credit for any of these goings on. But nonetheless, you and I, as Christians, as saved, born-again believers, we know that it was God Almighty who was orchestrating these events. It was not random. It was not dumb luck. This is God's guiding hand, and He's leading Israel to a good end. Well, we should think about Esther along those lines, because it happens this way for the Jewish people time and time and time again. Not that everything always goes their way, not that everything is always great for a Jew, because we know that it's not true at all. There have been many, many very tragic times for the Jews throughout their history. But nonetheless, we can trust and know and believe that these things that are happening are by the Lord's hand, in the sense that He's either doing it or allowing it. And He is very much in control. He is very much God Almighty on the throne. And all right, I'll just end there. God is high and lifted up. He's on His throne. Let's bow, let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, we just love You. We praise You. We thank You for Esther. We thank You for all of Your word. We thank You, dear Lord, for being high and lifted up, for being in control. We thank You, dear Lord, for guiding our lives, for working out everything for good for those that love You. We pray and ask, dear Lord, that You would continue to do a great, mighty work in our lives. Continue to give us boldness as we serve You. I pray that we'd serve You well. I pray, dear Lord, even in these trying times of living with this coronavirus, so many businesses being shut down, so many people home without work, many people laid off or unemployed. I pray, dear Lord, for our spirit. I pray, dear Lord, that we would not allow this to tear us down, to steal our joy, dear Lord, because I trust and believe that You are in control of that. I pray, dear Lord, that You would give us a constant reminder of Your grace, Your love, and Your mercy, and how it is that You truly are high and lifted up on Your throne and in complete control of everything that's going on. I thank You for all these things. In Jesus' name, amen.